Happy World Puppetry Day, everybody. I decided that I would give a bit of a technical breakdown on how I made Zazu from last year and how to do it. I have loved puppets for as long as I can remember. This is probably one of, if not the most complex puppet I've ever made, but let's just say Zazu is not the only puppet I've ever made. I've made a whole bunch in different styles throughout the course of the years, and I figured because when I did his video, I didn't give a whole breakdown on how I actually make my stuff. This video is going to be a technical breakdown on how I did all of the movement pieces for Zazu. So let's go to that. Zazu's feet. So I wanted them to be able to have some mobility and flexibility in them for when I have him hanging up. They can kind of dangle down at this angle, or they can press up and they can sit tucked up a little bit more, allowing them. There is no hinge in the hip here, so all of the movement is in the foot. Basically, this is done with a couple of pieces of thermoplastic or Warbler back up here. So this leg is basically a half of a gachapon ball and then a styrofoam cup that I've reinforced. I don't think there's any point, there we go, actually, there's the cup. And what I've taken is I took a piece of Warbler and I jammed it into the cup, and I've secured it through the top of the cup. There's a secured port at the top, so it flares out a little bit, so you can't just like pull the foot off. It's actually pretty snug on here. And then at the bottom of this foot here, I don't know if any angle you could really see it in, but there is a bolt that goes through the foot, basically from the widest port here to the widest part down here. And that bolt sits with a washer, and it is anchored in place, allowing the foot to be connected to one and then the leg to be connected to the other part of it, allowing for this movement. It was like the most cost-efficient way I could figure out how to do it, as I was able to get like the handful of nuts and bolts for like $2 at Home Depot. So really, really easy. Both feet have it, so you don't see much of anything underneath. It's all up here at the top. So basically where this little edge is here is where the top of basically the nut sits. So yeah, that is how I went about with the movement in the feet. So going into the back of his head, you can actually, from his feathers here, fully from his feathers, the whole back of his head comes off. I have it attached with neodymium magnets, and back here you can see the full mechanism for his eyes, or at least what was going to be the full mechanism for his eyes. Due to time constraints, I ended up not being able to fully rig this up, but I've got the bar in place for that holds the eyes steady, and this specifically controls the eyebrows, eyelashes, and that controls there, allowing him, that had I been able to actually do this fully, would have been allowing him to blink. So yeah, that's what it looks like inside of his head. I have it all painted black so that if you do see anything inside of his head, it just disappears into shadows anyways. Taking these off as best as I can, maybe not, because this one's pretty close on that side. I actually has shaded them in the same way that they're done up in the Broadway production, where they are more blue and then pale up at the top of the lid. That way it gives a sense of depth when when they're actually down. It works out really well and ends up looking really cool. So that is the mechanism specifically on the inside of his head. Now, for the chattiest bird on the savannah, I had to make sure that I could control his mouth to some degree. This is probably the biggest thing that I plan on replacing before even just Fan Expo. I would like to fully replace this whole mechanism here. Basically, it is done up in the same way that the Broadway one is, where there is a pull string that pulls from the bottom of his beak, that pulls all the way down, and it's supposed to pull to a trigger down here. The issue is that my trigger didn't end up working. So I ended up having to manually basically, the way I was holding him was I'd be manually pulling this backwards, allowing him to still be able to speak. So, it's not the most perfect solution, as you can tell, even just with regular wear and tear, it's already starting to pull away. I need to get a better epoxy glue on here. This was kind of rushed, and so he's only hot glued at the moment. It won't be hard to color match him and whatnot to get it back to the proper thing. On top of that, this is just a very basic wood dowel that I very slowly screwed all of these eyelets into. They are not pre-drilled in here. They are not secured in here. They are somehow still very, very sturdy. So, going between all of that, this would flow down through all the eyelets, just to kind of keep it so it wouldn't get tangled, and then come down to the trigger mechanism that would be down here. Don't mind all of the straps from all the days I brought them to to Fan Expo. But it would come down to here, and this was going to be the trigger. It's made out of just a little piece of Worbla. Basically, I was using whatever I had on hand to do it. Unfortunately, it didn't end up working. I don't know if you can see. It didn't end up working the same amount that I was hoping it would. I imagine it's probably because the string has a bit of stretch in it, and it just wouldn't allow for the same amount of compensation. To make his mouth a hinge and so that it would stay closed, I actually made myself a spring. So up here, this copper spring here, which has now completely lost all of its tension, is actually handmade. I have a wire spinner that I can use to make springs, so I can make them at the tautness that I want them and at the size that I need them to be. So I actually made this so that it would hook into his mouth and that it would want to stay closed instead of want to hang open all the time. Allowing him, well yeah, see now that it's all lost, allowing it to want to stay closed like this, instead of trying to want to hang open all the time and me having to hold it closed. Now that the tautness and the springiness, I guess, out of the spring is like completely gone, I definitely am going to need to go back and make a new one or get a new one. For the hinge on his beak, I have actually, it's quite literally just foam being held in place on both ends. So this is contact cemented. This sucker is not going to move. And so I've got these, there's 3 strips that go along the underside. 1, 2, 3. That go on the underside that allow him to have a movable beak. And so it allows him to still be able to speak. In the future, I plan on filling in this gap right here, so it actually looks like a full continuous beak. And then he'll be able to fully speak, and you won't see like the underside of his head while he's doing so. So yeah, that's more or less it. Those are my plans for the future of Zazu. I do plan on bringing him back to Toronto Fan Expo, or Fan Expo Canada this year, with all of his upgrades. I also have another 2 puppets actually in mind for it. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you maybe soon for my next video that does actually have to do about puppets, and for maybe even Toronto or Fan Expo Canada. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.